I was supposed to be home for Christmas. After months of working extra shifts at the factory, I promised myself I'd take the last week off, pack up, and finally get to sit with my family without worrying about overtime. The day before Christmas Eve, I loaded my old car with a couple of bags and started driving. The roads were slippery from fresh snow, and everything looked quieter than normal, like the world had gone on pause for the holiday. My phone was almost dead, but I didn't care. I wanted the long drive, the silence, the chance to think without anyone interrupting me. By the time night fell, I had driven a few hours, the lights of towns fading behind me as I got onto a stretch of highway that barely had any traffic. I was tired but determined. My parents lived in the country, miles away from the nearest small town, and the GPS warned me the last gas station was 20 miles back. I ignored it, thinking I had enough fuel. Snow was picking up, thick and heavy now, settling on the road in slippery layers that reflected the dull orange glow of my headlights. The kind of snow that sticks to everything, the kind that makes you slow down without realizing how slow you've gone. That's when it happened. I didn't even notice it at first. A single car had stopped in the middle of the highway, its hazard lights flickering weakly. I swerved slightly to avoid hitting it. At first, I thought it was abandoned, someone who had slid off the road. But as I got closer, I saw a figure, standing frozen in place, bent slightly, shivering. My first instinct was to stop. I almost rolled down my window, ready to ask if they needed help, but then my brain screamed at me. I remembered every news story about people on isolated roads, how quickly things could turn bad. I hesitated, inching past slowly. The person waved their arms weakly, a small pleading gesture. Something about the way they were standing, the way the snow clung to their coat, made me uncomfortable. I didn't stop. I thought I'd call the police from the next town. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and for a second, I thought I saw them moving. Just standing, but maybe stepping forward. My stomach turned. I kept driving, telling myself I was imagining things. The snow was heavy, and visibility was dropping fast. The highway seemed endless, dark except for the reflection of my headlights on the wet pavement. I tried to shake the image from my mind, but it kept replaying, that strange, motionless figure waving at me in the snow. About 15 minutes later, my car started making a strange noise, a grinding, low thrum that grew louder with every turn of the wheel. I knew something was wrong with the brakes or the transmission. I pulled off at the next clearing I could see, which wasn't much a narrow shoulder beside a cluster of trees. The engine sputtered as I cut it, leaving the car completely silent. I tried to start it again, but nothing happened. My stomach dropped. I was alone, miles from any real help, in freezing weather, with snow still coming down hard enough that I could barely see 100 feet in front of me. I checked my phone. Dead. Of course. I cursed myself, realizing that I should have charged it before leaving. My only choice was to leave the car and walk. I grabbed my coat, zipped it tight, pulled on gloves, and started walking along the shoulder. Each step sank into fresh snow, making a soft crunching sound that felt impossibly loud in the silence. The snow was blowing into my face, stinging my skin. The darkness pressed in around me. I tried to convince myself I'd find a house or a small gas station if I kept going, but a knot of dread had formed in my stomach. Then I heard it. First, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. A scraping noise, faint but deliberate, coming from behind me. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but I didn't. The scraping grew louder, as if something was moving through the snow toward me, slow but steady. I glanced back, and my heart skipped a beat. I saw footprints in the snow, not mine. They were large, uneven, and coming from the car I had abandoned. I hadn't noticed anyone following me, hadn't seen anyone leave the car. Yet there they were, steps closing in on me. Panic surged, and I started running, tripping over uneven patches of snow, lungs burning from cold and fear. I didn't know how far I ran, just that I kept running, praying for a house, a light, something. And then I saw it, a faint orange glow in the distance. Relief hit me so hard I stumbled almost blindly toward it. It was a small diner, open all night, steam curling from a coffee sign. I burst inside, slamming the door behind me, snow sliding off my coat and pooling on the floor. The diner was empty except for one older man behind the counter. His face was lined, tired, but he nodded at me as I approached. I told him my car had broken down, asked if I could use a phone. He pointed to the back of the diner. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, called a tow truck, and stayed on the phone with them as the man made me a cup of coffee. Hot, bitter, and exactly what I needed. I told myself I was safe now. The tow truck came an hour later. We drove back together, the driver chatting quietly about how dangerous isolated roads were in winter. When we reached my car, I froze. There was no one around. No footprints in the snow leading to it. No sign of the person I had seen. Nothing. Only my car, silent and still, with a single set of prints leading into the trees, disappearing into the night. I couldn't explain it. I didn't try. I climbed in, letting the tow truck haul it to the mechanic, my hands still shaking. By the time I got to my parents' house, Christmas morning was breaking. Snow covered everything in a perfect, peaceful blanket. The world looked normal, like nothing had happened. I hugged my parents, sat by the fire, and tried to forget the terror of the night. I didn't say much about it. There was no proof, nothing to show. But I couldn't shake the feeling of those footsteps, the cold weight of someone or something watching me in the snow. Weeks later, when the car was fixed, I returned to the same stretch of highway. I wanted to see if I had imagined it, if maybe the snow had made everything look strange. The highway was empty, the snow just as thick, the same silence pressing in. I walked the shoulder where I thought I had seen the figure, and then I saw it. A small, crumpled coat, half buried in snow, and beside it, a wallet with a license inside. It belonged to someone who had disappeared from the news a few months back. I left it there for the authorities, not touching anything else. The police came later, took statements, but they never found anyone else. I never found out exactly what had happened that night. I never saw anyone on that road again. But every Christmas, when I drive home and the snow is falling thick and heavy, I slow down, watch the roadside, and remember how close I came to something I still can't explain. Something that wasn't supernatural, but terrifying all the same. Something real. That Christmas, I finally appreciated being home more than I ever had. I appreciated warmth, safety, family. I appreciated the little things that make life feel secure. And I promised myself I would never take isolation for granted. Never think I was safe on a quiet, empty road, and never underestimate how thin the line is between normal and dangerous. I remember that Christmas like it was yesterday, even though it was years ago. It wasn't the usual bright, cheerful holiday. The kind of Christmas where lights twinkle on every house, carols float through the air, and the smell of baking fills kitchens. No, this was a Christmas that felt wrong from the very first moment I woke up. I was living alone in a small apartment at the time, just me and my cat, Max. The city outside was quiet, unusually quiet, for December. There was snow, of course, thin layers covering the streets, but it wasn't the soft kind that makes everything magical. It was cold and sharp, the kind that cut your nose and made your fingers ache through the gloves. That morning, I woke up to a strange silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind of silence that feels like someone is holding their breath just outside your door. I went about my usual routine, but the apartment felt off. Shadows seemed darker in the corners, even though the sun was barely up. Max, normally a calm, lazy cat, was pacing nervously near the window, his fur puffed up. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just my nerves getting to me. I had to go to the store for some last-minute Christmas supplies. It was early, around 8 a.m., and the streets were nearly empty. Snow crunched under my boots, and every so often, a car would pass, kicking up a flurry behind it. I noticed things I wouldn't normally notice: the way streetlights flickered, the way the wind carried sounds differently, almost like it was listening. I shook my head, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was following me. By the time I got back, the sun was higher, but the apartment felt colder than before. I stacked the groceries on the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I noticed it. A package, plain brown, sitting by the door. I didn't recognize it. I live alone. I wasn't expecting deliveries. There was no name, no return address. Just a small cardboard box with tape that looked cheap, like it had been rushed. I should have left it there. I should have called someone. But curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. Inside was a set of old photographs, all of my apartment. I froze. The first one was of the living room, the second of the kitchen, then the hallway, my bedroom, and finally a close-up of my bedroom window. The dates were recent. Yesterday, the night before, someone had been inside my apartment. My hands were shaking. I checked every door and window, all locked. Nothing was missing. No sign of forced entry. It was like they had been in and out without leaving a trace. I felt sick. I called my neighbor, an older woman who had lived in the building for decades, and asked if she had seen anyone around. She said no, but her voice had that quiet suspicion, like she thought I should be more careful. I tried to go about the day, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. I decorated the small tree I had in the corner, stringing lights carefully, placing ornaments just so. But every time I heard a creak from the floor above or the rustle of snow outside, my heart jumped. By nightfall, I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining someone outside, watching, waiting. Around 10 p.m., I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate, almost mocking. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept to the door. The hallway was empty. Nothing. Just the faint echo of my own heartbeat. I stayed awake the rest of the night, every sense on edge. Around 3 a.m., the temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath inside the apartment. Then I noticed a shadow moving across the window, on the outside. Someone was out there, right outside my apartment, looking in. I grabbed my coat and ran downstairs, calling the police as I went. The cops arrived quickly, but by the time they got there, the shadow was gone. They took a report, told me it was probably just someone playing a prank, but their eyes told me they didn't really believe that. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's place, too shaken to return. When I finally went back the next morning, the first thing I noticed was the snow outside. It had been fresh when I left, untouched. Now, there were footprints leading from the street to my door. Not one set, hundreds, circling, overlapping like whoever it was had been watching all night. Inside, the apartment looked untouched, but I could feel it like the air itself had changed, heavier somehow. I decided to take action. I installed cameras, changed all the locks, put motion sensors on every door. I even added extra lighting outside, making the apartment feel more like a fortress than a home. Still, the sense of being watched never went away. Every creak, every shadow, every flicker of the lights sent my heart racing. Christmas came. I tried to make the best of it. I bought myself a proper dinner, cooked a small roast, set the table with care. I wanted some sense of normalcy, some sense of peace. As I sat down to eat, I heard a knock at the door. My stomach dropped. I didn't expect anyone. Not friends, not neighbors. I stayed frozen for a moment before peeking through the peephole. It was a delivery man holding a small package. Relief washed over me. I opened it to find a simple gift, a box of homemade cookies with a note that read, "Merry Christmas. You are safe now." No signature, no return address. My hands trembled, not with fear this time, but with a strange, heavy relief. Over the next few days, I never saw anyone suspicious again. The photographs, the footprints, the shadow outside, they never happened again. The experience left me shaken, sure, but also oddly grateful. Grateful that someone had noticed, that someone had intervened without me ever knowing who it was. The fear never completely left, but I learned to live with it, to be cautious, and to value safety in ways I had never before. That Christmas ended quietly, almost uneventfully, in the way that real life does after a nightmare. I sat by my small tree, Max curled up beside me, the lights casting warm, gentle shadows across the walls. I realized something important. Fear is part of life, and so is relief. That year, Christmas wasn't about presents, music, or decorations. It was about surviving, about noticing the little signs, and about appreciating the quiet moments of safety when they finally arrive. It was a scary Christmas, yes, but in the end, it was also a clear reminder that even in the darkest, most frightening moments, there's a chance for light, and sometimes that light comes in unexpected, silent ways. I had always loved Christmas. The quiet cold, the way snow fell softly over rooftops, the way the streetlights glowed through the white haze. That year, I was living alone for the first time in my small apartment on the edge of town. My parents had moved south for the winter, and my roommates had gone home early. I liked the solitude, the way the air felt sharper in the evening, the sound of my own footsteps crunching against fresh snow. The week before Christmas, the town had been hit with a snowstorm. Roads were empty, trees bowed under heavy layers of snow, and the wind howled through the gaps in the buildings. I had stocked up on essentials: food, water, batteries, candles, and I thought I was prepared for anything. I even had my fireplace ready, stacked with wood I had cut myself, the smell of pine filling the apartment whenever I lit it. On Christmas Eve, I decided to take a walk. The snow had slowed, leaving the world silent except for the occasional cracking of ice underfoot. I wrapped my coat tightly around me and stepped out, intending to stroll to the corner store for one last-minute treat. The streets were empty, the familiar houses ghostly and still in the white haze. Streetlights reflected on the snow like pale moons, and the shadows seemed longer than usual. I passed by my neighbor's house, noticing the lights were off, which was unusual. Normally, the old man would have a small tree in his window, blinking red and green. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he had gone somewhere for Christmas. As I walked further, the silence pressed in on me. The wind gusted suddenly, rattling the bare branches overhead, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I kept going, telling myself it was just the cold, but there was a tension in the air I couldn't shake. When I reached the corner store, I realized it was closed. Not a big deal, most places shut early on Christmas Eve, but as I turned to head back, I noticed tracks in the snow behind me. Fresh tracks leading the same way I had come. Footprints, heavy and uneven, like someone had been dragging their feet. I stopped, my breath fogging in the cold air, and stared at them. They didn't match mine, and there weren't any others around. I walked faster. The streets were quieter than they had been 5 minutes ago, and the feeling of being watched crept in. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound exaggerated. My apartment was only a few blocks away, but with each step, the footprints seemed to echo my own, as if someone or something was mirroring me. By the time I reached my building, I was sweating under my coat, though the air was freezing. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. When I finally got inside, I locked the door and bolted it, sliding the deadbolt into place. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, listening. Nothing, just the muffled howl of wind against the windows. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I had imagined the footprints, that it was probably some late-night worker or another resident. I made a fire in the fireplace and sat on the couch with a mug of hot chocolate, the warmth slowly seeping into me. I thought about Christmas past's family dinners, laughter, the smell of roasted chicken, and felt a pang of loneliness. But I tried to focus on the small comforts. The lights on my small tree, the flicker of flames in the hearth, the soft hum of the heater. Hours passed. Around midnight I heard it, a sound from the street below, faint at first, then growing clearer. The crunch of snow, slow and deliberate, moving toward the building. My heart hammered in my chest. I pressed my back against the wall, staring at the window, but the curtains were drawn, and the street was buried in snow. I strained to listen. The steps stopped at the corner, paused, then continued. They didn't move past my building. I debated calling the police, but I felt stupid imagining someone lurking in the snow outside my apartment on Christmas Eve. Still, I couldn't shake the tension. I moved to the window and carefully parted the curtains. My blood ran cold. At the base of the building, footprints led straight to the front door. Not casual prints, these were deliberate, wide, heavy. I pulled the phone off the table and dialed 911, whispering to myself as I waited for an operator. The call connected, and I explained the situation, giving my address. They told me a unit was on its way and to stay inside. I did, pacing nervously, watching the door as if it might suddenly burst open. Minutes dragged. The snow fell silently, and the footprints stayed. Then I heard it. A faint, soft scraping at the door. Someone was trying to force it open, quietly, carefully. I clutched a fire poker, holding it like a lifeline. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears. I tried to tell myself it couldn't happen here, that this was just my imagination. But the sound repeated, metal against wood, deliberate and steady. I remembered the old neighbor. He had warned me years ago about break-ins around Christmas, thieves who took advantage of the cold, of people distracted by the holidays. I kept my eyes on the door, every muscle tensed. Then the sound stopped, silence heavier than before. I debated looking through the peephole, but I was frozen with fear. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the distant siren of a police car. Relief surged through me, sharp and intense. The footsteps had vanished. The scraping had stopped. When the police arrived, they searched the building. Nothing. No one was hiding. No signs of forced entry other than the faint scratches on my door. They said it could have been a passerby curious or lost in the snowstorm, but the footprints and scraping were too deliberate for a random passerby. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting by the fire, checking the locks every few minutes. Morning came, quiet and pale, sunlight glinting off the snow. The world seemed safe again, normal even, but I couldn't shake the tension that had taken root in me. I realized then that Christmas wasn't just about warmth and joy. It could be a time when isolation made you vulnerable, when the familiar streets and soft snow could hide something dark and deliberate. By the time my parents called later that day, I was calmer. I told them I was fine, that it was just a strange night. But I had learned something important. Preparation wasn't just about food and candles. It was about awareness, about not underestimating the stillness around you. I spent the day clearing snow from the sidewalks, greeting neighbors from a distance, and making sure my apartment was secure. It wasn't the Christmas I had expected. There were no carols, no laughter, no scent of cinnamon from a kitchen bustling with family. But there was safety, there was warmth, and there was a quiet sense of triumph in knowing I had faced something that could have ended badly and come out intact. By evening, I sat back by the fireplace, the snow falling softly outside, the city muffled in white. I sipped my hot chocolate and let myself relax. For the first time that night, I felt like Christmas had arrived, not in the lights or gifts, but in the calm that followed fear, in the small, steady heartbeat of life continuing. The streets outside were empty again, silent except for the occasional gust of wind, and I knew that I had survived, that I had made it through something that could have ended differently. And for the first time that Christmas, I smiled. It was Christmas Eve, and the wind had started early that morning, rattling the thin panes of our old windows and pushing the snow into sharp drifts against the house. The kind of snow that made the roads disappear under a white sheet, leaving only the faint tracks of cars and the occasional footprint of a stray dog. I had spent the day shoveling a path from the driveway to the street, over and over, because the snow didn't care how tired I was. By late afternoon, my fingers were raw, my back ached, and the small heater I dragged from the living room barely warmed my frozen hands. We lived on the edge of town, at the end of a long, winding road that cut through the woods. A road where the streetlights stopped halfway, leaving the last mile in darkness except for the occasional reflection of snow on the branches. It had always been quiet out there, and I liked it that way. But on that Christmas Eve, the quiet felt wrong. Not empty exactly, but like the woods were holding their breath. I brushed it off at first, telling myself it was just the wind howling through the pines. By nightfall, the snow had piled higher, softening the edges of the world outside. The streetlights down the hill barely pierced the storm, and the house felt small and isolated. I had finished decorating the little tree by the window. Its lights blinked softly, casting shadows across the walls. The smell of pine and cinnamon from the candles mingled with the cold, and for a moment, everything felt normal, like Christmas Eve should. Then I heard the first crunch on the snow outside. First, I froze. I live alone, my family having moved away years ago. The only reason anyone would be out there was if they were lost or reckless in this storm. I waited, holding my breath, listening. Another crunch, slow this time, deliberate. It came from the side of the house, where the snow piled against the old shed. My heart started to thump, a rapid, nervous beat that seemed louder than the wind. I told myself it was an animal, a stray dog, a raccoon, but the steps were too heavy, too measured. No animal walks like that. I went to the window, pulling back the curtain just a crack. The light from the tree didn't reach far, but I could see a shadow moving slowly across the snow, stopping every few steps as if listening. It was too dark to make out a figure, but the shape was unmistakably human. I stepped back, my pulse racing. I had a shotgun tucked under the bed, something I had never imagined I'd use, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I debated calling the police, but the storm was bad, and by the time they came, whoever was out there could be inside or gone. I decided to move cautiously to the kitchen, grabbing a heavy cast iron pan from the stove. I could hear my own breathing, loud in the quiet house, and the crunching outside seemed to slow, stop, start again. Whoever it was circling the house. My stomach tightened. The back door to the kitchen led out to the small porch. I peered through the glass. Footprints in the snow led from the driveway, stopping at the edge of the porch. And then suddenly there were more. They weren't mine and they weren't leaving. They led up to the side of the porch and then they stopped. The storm worsened, the wind cutting against the windows, shaking them violently. I could hear the snow hitting the siding, the distant cracking of branches under its weight. I tried to calm myself. Could be someone just looking for help. I had to be rational, but rational didn't explain the feeling that someone was studying the house, waiting. I locked every door, checked every window. I barricaded the kitchen door with the table, wedging the heavy leg against the frame. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pan. Hours passed. The footsteps disappeared, or maybe I just stopped hearing them over the wind. Couldn't sleep. I stayed near the window, watching the faint glow of the streetlight down the hill. My mind kept flashing images of someone forcing the door, of them being inside while I slept, the sound of glass breaking, footsteps over the floorboards. Every small noise made me jump. A tree branch scraping the siding sounded like someone tapping at the window. My phone was dead. I had forgotten to charge it. Then, around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. Not outside this time, from the front porch. A slow, dragging sound, like someone moving something heavy. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was had been waiting for the wind to cover their approach. My first thought was to run to the back door, but the snow was knee-deep. There was no getting away quickly. I gripped the pan like a lifeline. I waited. The dragging stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. And then someone tried the door handle. Just one twist. The sound was muted, cautious, but unmistakable. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it would give me away. I held my breath, standing as still as I could. Another twist, a pause, and then footsteps retreating down the steps. I didn't move until the sun started to rise. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried under a thick, unbroken blanket of snow. I went outside carefully, scanning the ground. The footprints weren't just from the person they had circled the house, coming close enough to see inside the windows. But there was something else. A small bag, half buried in the snow near the porch. I brought it inside, hands trembling, and opened it. Inside were a few simple things. A thermos, some gloves, a flashlight. Nothing dangerous, nothing sharp. Just survival gear. I realized then what had happened. Whoever had come to my house wasn't trying to hurt me. They were lost, caught in the storm, desperate for shelter. The fear had turned into misunderstanding. My mind had built the worst-case scenario, filling in every detail with violence. I stayed up the rest of the day clearing the snow and making a small fire. The stranger never came back, and I never saw anyone in the footprints again. But I learned something that day about fear, how it grows in the dark, how it twists reality until the mind is its own worst enemy. When Christmas finally arrived, I sat by the tree with the window open, letting the sunlight hit the snow. I could see the footprints from the night before, half covered now, slowly disappearing. And for the first time in a long while, I felt calm, even happy. The storm had passed. The night had been terrifying, yes, but I had made it through, and that was enough. I had faced the fear and survived it. Christmas, after all, was about more than lights and presents. It was about enduring, about finding a little peace even after the darkest hours. By the time evening came, I had a fire burning bright, the tree twinkling, and a small smile on my face. I realized that fear, as consuming as it felt, could end. You just had to wait it out, face it, and keep moving forward. And that day, I had done just that. I had been working at the warehouse for nearly a year by the time that Christmas Eve came. Normally, the holidays were a quiet period for our facility, but that year, we had been hit by a massive rush in orders. Everyone was exhausted, including me. I was on the night shift, which meant I had to come in around 10 p.m. and stay until 6 a.m. The parking lot was usually empty at that hour, and the only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional beep of forklifts moving pallets around. That night, the cold had sunk deep into my bones. The kind of cold that makes your teeth chatter and your skin sting, even under layers of clothing. Snow had started falling lightly, and the ground outside was slick with ice. The warehouse itself was enormous. I had worked there long enough to know its twists and turns, the way the aisles stretched out like endless tunnels. Every shelf was stacked with boxes, some marked fragile, others just generic brown. I usually moved with purpose, checking off orders, scanning barcodes, and loading pallets. But that night, something felt off. The hum of the lights seemed louder, echoing in a way that made the empty space feel enormous. First, it was just small things. A box I was sure I had set down was slightly out of place when I turned back. A pallet that had been facing one way was now facing another. I told myself I must have misremembered, but the feeling of being watched kept creeping up on me. Not the kind of watchfulness you feel in a crowded room, but the kind that burrows under your skin, pressing into your spine and making your chest tighten. I was about halfway through my shift when I heard a faint scuffling sound. It was soft, almost like someone dragging a heavy box across the concrete floor, but I was alone. I froze in place, holding the scanner in my hand, listening. The sound stopped when I stopped. I waited a few seconds, thinking maybe it was just my imagination. I shook my head and kept moving, trying to convince myself that it was just the building settling or a loose pallet rolling. As the hours passed, the noises became harder to ignore. There were thumps and bumps in the distance, coming from parts of the warehouse I wasn't even near. Every time I rounded a corner, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow disappearing behind a stack of boxes. I tried to ignore it. The rational part of me insisted it was just fatigue, the mind playing tricks when you're exhausted and alone in a massive, echoing space. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., I went to the back of the warehouse to pick up a shipment that had come in late. The rear door was slightly ajar. I always made sure it was locked when I came in, but there it was, a narrow strip of light leaking in from the outside. My stomach sank. Whoever had been there had gotten in somehow. I didn't hear any alarms, but I had never been able to fully trust the old security system. It was a relic prone to glitches. I debated calling someone, but the phones didn't work in that part of the building. My radio crackled faintly, but I got no response. I knew I had to investigate because just sitting in the middle of the warehouse waiting would have been worse. I crept toward the back door, my boots making soft thuds against the concrete, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The closer I got, the stronger the smell hit me. It was metallic like blood, but sharp and chemical-like. I froze, heart hammering. There were no obvious signs of a break-in, no shattered glass, no forced locks. The door was simply open, swinging slightly in the cold wind. I stepped outside cautiously, flashlight sweeping across the snow-covered yard. Nothing. Empty trucks sat idle, their cargo doors closed. The lot was deserted, and the snow muffled any distant sounds. I shook my head, trying to clear the panic that had started to claw at me. Maybe I had imagined the smell. Maybe it was a leak from one of the storage containers. When I turned back to go inside, I saw it. A set of footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the edge of the lot straight to the door. They were wide, heavy, like someone had been carrying something large. My stomach dropped. Someone had been here in the middle of the night while I was supposedly alone. My hands shook as I went back inside, making sure to close the door tightly. I locked it this time, double-checked the deadbolt, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The rest of my shift was a blur. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed alive. The warehouse, which had always felt familiar, now seemed like a labyrinth designed to trap me. I moved quickly but cautiously, finishing orders, scanning boxes, and avoiding the aisles where I had seen shadows flicker. I stayed near the main floor, close to the office, where I could at least see the cameras. Finally, around 6 a.m., my shift ended. The morning light was starting to seep through the skylights. I expected relief, but the unease didn't leave me. I walked to my car slowly, checking behind every corner, every stack of pallets. The snow crunched under my boots, masking any sound of movement behind me. When I reached my car, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A single box, unmarked, sitting on the passenger seat. I hadn't left anything there the night before. I opened the box carefully. Inside, there was a small bundle of red fabric. I pulled it out, and my hands shook as I realized it was torn Christmas decorations, ripped from some other warehouse. Taped to the bottom of the box was a note, scrawled in messy handwriting. "We saw you." I froze. The message wasn't a joke. Whoever had been in the warehouse had been watching me. Maybe for hours, maybe for the whole night. The realization made my chest tighten. But then I remembered the rear door, the footprints, the smell, the shadows. They hadn't hurt me, not physically. They had only wanted to scare me, to let me know they could. I reported it immediately to my manager, who called the police. They found no one in the warehouse, no signs of forced entry other than the door, and no fingerprints except mine. The investigation dragged for weeks, but nothing concrete ever came from it. The police told me it was likely a trespasser, someone using the chaos of the holiday rush to get inside and play games. That didn't make me feel better. I knew the person had been clever, patient, and bold. But here's the part that made the ending bearable, the part that made me feel like I had won in some small way. I decided not to let it ruin my holidays. I went home that Christmas morning, exhausted and tense, but determined to celebrate. I baked cookies, hung decorations, and even put up the torn red pieces from the box in a small corner as a reminder that I had survived. I spent the day with my family, laughing, sharing stories, and slowly letting the fear drain out of me. The warehouse remained secure after that. The doors were reinforced, cameras upgraded, and I never saw footprints like that again. But I learned something important that night. Fear is real, but it is also something you can endure. I had been terrified, sure, but I had made it through, and that made the lights on the Christmas tree feel warmer, the snow outside brighter, and the laughter of my family even more precious. I never fully understood why they came or how they got in, and maybe I never will. But that night taught me that even when something seems unstoppable, even when the darkness presses against you from all sides, there is always a way to finish the night, to find the light, and to feel safe again. And that Christmas, for the first time in a long while, I felt that. I was working the late shift at the warehouse that Christmas Eve, the kind of place that smelled of cardboard, dust, and old wood polish. I had started here only a few months ago, and while I'd never thought I'd spend the holidays here, the extra pay was too good to refuse. The building was enormous, a dark maze of shelves stacked with boxes that reached the ceiling. Most of my coworkers had left hours ago, leaving me alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of my footsteps on the cold concrete floor. The air was thick with that metallic winter chill that seeps into your bones, and every sound seemed sharper in the silence. Started around 9. I had been moving boxes near the back corner of the warehouse when I realized one of the pallets was leaning dangerously. I approached it carefully, shining my small flashlight along the edge. When I noticed that the boxes weren't just stacked poorly, they were all packed with something heavy. Not heavy in the usual sense, like paper or electronics, but dense, as if someone had filled them with sand or metal weights. I frowned, muttering to myself about sloppy shipping practices, and began to shift them back into a safer position. That's when I heard it. A low, scraping sound, like metal against concrete, coming from the far end of the warehouse. I froze. It was impossible. I thought there shouldn't have been anyone else here. I was supposed to be alone. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped, then started again, louder, closer. My heart started to beat faster, each thump echoing in my ears. I flicked the flashlight toward the noise, swinging it slowly, but the beam only landed on the empty shelves. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the building settling. Warehouses make all kinds of noises, especially in winter. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I continued moving boxes, but my hands were trembling. Every time the flashlight flicked over a shadow, I jumped, convinced something or someone was there. About an hour later, I heard it again, this time accompanied by a faint thump, like a heavy footstep. I stopped entirely, listening, and that's when I realized the sound wasn't coming from the main aisle. It was coming from the storage area behind the metal doors I wasn't supposed to enter. I had been told by the night manager to stay out of that section. It was reserved for inventory checks, and only supervisors were allowed inside. But the sounds were deliberate, slow, and heavy, as if someone or something was dragging boxes or equipment across the floor. I debated calling the manager, but my phone was in my locker, too far away, and the idea of walking to it felt like it would take forever. The sound came again, closer this time. My skin crawled. I slowly moved toward the door to the restricted section, my flashlight trembling in my hand. As I reached for the handle, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. That was impossible. I had locked it when I started my shift. Someone had to be inside. My first instinct was to turn around and run to the front doors, but the thought of leaving the warehouse with a potential intruder inside froze me in place. I pushed the door open slowly. The hinges creaked, and I felt a cold draft rush past me. Inside, the room was dark, filled with rows of heavy crates. Most were labeled with the usual shipping codes, but a few had no markings at all. My flashlight caught the edges of something long and narrow lying across the floor. I stepped closer, heart in my throat, and realized they were more boxes stacked in a line, leading toward the back wall. Then I saw it, a figure crouched behind a stack of crates. At first, I thought it was another worker, but something was off. The figure didn't move naturally. It was stiff, almost hiding, watching me with a stillness that made my stomach twist. I swallowed hard and stepped back, tripping over a stray pallet. The noise must have alerted them, because the figure jumped and bolted toward the far wall. I turned to follow, but they disappeared behind another row of shelves. Panic hit me. I ran toward the exit, but the warehouse seemed to stretch farther than before. Every aisle looked the same, long shadows cast by the flickering fluorescent lights. My flashlight flickered and went out for a moment, leaving me in darkness. I fumbled to turn it back on, heart hammering, and when the light returned, I noticed something chilling. Boxes along the walls were now shifted, as if the figure had moved them to block my path. I ran blindly, my hands scraping against cold metal shelves. My mind was screaming at me to leave, but the exits all seemed farther away. Somehow, I could hear the scraping again, close behind me. Every instinct screamed that they were gaining on me. My chest burned, lungs screaming for air, but I forced myself to keep moving. I rounded a corner and stumbled into a small office at the edge of the warehouse. It was a storage office, the kind with filing cabinets and a tiny desk, usually empty at night. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The sound of footsteps stopped immediately. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by my ragged breathing. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, convinced I could hear someone or something breathing just outside the door. Minutes passed. I had no idea how long I stayed there, every nerve screaming. Then, finally, I heard the sound of a truck starting outside. My phone buzzed. The night manager. I answered immediately, voice shaking. I barely managed to explain that someone was in the warehouse. There was a pause on the other end, then a promise that the police were on the way and that the manager himself was coming back to the building. I stayed in that office, flashlight held high, until I heard footsteps approaching the door, not the same heavy, dragging steps, but careful, measured ones. The door handle rattled, and then the manager's voice, calling my name, told me to stay calm. I unlocked the door, and I ran to the entrance with him and the first police officers. The restricted area was cleared, but there was no one inside. Nothing was missing, no sign of forced entry. Later, I learned what had happened. Someone had broken into the warehouse hours earlier, hiding among the boxes, waiting for a chance to steal high-value inventory. They had slipped in while the afternoon shift was leaving, navigating the maze of shelves with practiced ease. My presence had scared them off, and they had escaped through a service door I didn't even know existed, one that led out to the alley behind the building. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Police took my statement, checked security footage, and promised they would increase patrols. I went home at sunrise, exhausted, shaking, and covered in sweat despite the winter chill. That Christmas morning, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the soft snow falling, trying to calm my nerves. I realized how close I had come to something I couldn't have imagined, being alone with someone who was willing to watch and wait for hours, just to take what wasn't theirs. I never worked another late Christmas shift after that. The warehouse hired security for every holiday, and I stayed strictly day shifts from then on. But even years later, every time I see the quiet glow of a fluorescent light in an empty warehouse, or hear the soft scrape of metal on concrete, I remember that night. I remember the way the shadows seemed to shift just out of the corner of my eye, the stillness that was so unnatural it screamed danger, and the fear that had made every heartbeat feel like a drum in an empty cathedral. I also remember the feeling of relief once I made it out, the way the cold morning sun seemed to burn away the fear just a little, and the sense of safety in knowing that even in the scariest moments, I could survive. That Christmas ended not with joy or presents, but with a lesson that stayed with me forever. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't in stories or legends, they're real, silent, patient, and waiting for the right moment. And when you get out alive, the warmth of normal life, the coffee on your table, the quiet snow outside, the lights in your kitchen feels brighter than any decoration or gift. It was Christmas Eve, and the wind outside had taken on a sharp, bitter bite that cut through the thickest coat I had. I had spent the day in a haze of half-finished chores, putting the last decorations on the tree, stringing lights along the porch, and trying to get the old heater to stop coughing and rattling. The power had been flickering all day, a little too often, which always made me uneasy. Living alone in this old house, tucked into the edge of the forest, meant that even the smallest thing could feel huge and threatening. I had prepared everything for a quiet Christmas, the kind I liked. A small turkey in the oven, the smell of cinnamon and pine in the air, and the tree glowing softly in the corner of the living room. Outside, snow was coming down in heavy flakes, piling against the windows. The roads were empty, no lights from neighbors, no cars, just the endless dark and the occasional groan of the wind through the trees. Around 6, I went to check the driveway one last time. The snow had already formed a thick crust over the path. That's when I saw it. A set of footprints leading up from the road to my house. First, I froze. No one knew I was here. The closest house was nearly half a mile away, and in this weather, nobody walked this far. The footprints were deep in the snow, uneven, like someone had been dragging something. My heart started hammering. I scanned the dark road beyond, but the only motion was the snow, falling relentlessly. I went back inside, locked the doors, and drew the blinds tight. Every shadow in the room seemed exaggerated by the flickering lights from the tree. The heater rumbled like a distant engine, uneven, like it might give up at any second. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just someone passing by, maybe a lost traveler, but my mind refused to settle. The silence outside felt deliberate, like the forest itself was holding its breath. By 7, I had finished my dinner, but I barely touched it. I kept glancing at the window, imagining movement in the snow. Every flake that hit the glass sounded like a hammer, every gust of wind like a whisper in my ear. I tried to turn on some music, but the speakers crackled and died, leaving me with only the noise of the wind and the old house settling around me. The walls groaned, the floorboards creaked, and I could swear I heard soft scratching sounds coming from the back door. I told myself to stop imagining things and went to check. I pulled on my coat, grabbed the flashlight, and opened the back door. The snow was untouched back here except for one strange mark near the edge of the porch. It looked like a handprint, pressed into the snow, smeared as if someone had fallen or dragged themselves. My stomach dropped. I looked around, but the forest swallowed everything beyond a few feet of visibility. I didn't hear footsteps retreating, nothing, just the wind howling through the bare trees. The rational part of me wanted to call the police, but my cell phone was almost dead, and the signal was spotty in this area. I considered getting in the car and driving to the main road, but I didn't want to step into that dark, snow-covered wilderness. I went back inside, locked the door again, and tried to calm myself with tea. My hands shook so badly I almost spilled it. The house felt impossibly large in the dark, every shadow stretched and warped by the tiny Christmas lights on the tree. Hours passed slowly. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind thrash against the windows. Occasionally, I thought I saw movement outside, a shadow crossing the frosted glass, or maybe just a trick of the lights. My nerves were raw, and sleep refused to come. By midnight, the storm outside had intensified, snow piling high against the doors and windows. I could hear the branches of the trees cracking under the weight, falling against the roof in sharp, explosive thuds. Then I heard the sound that made my blood run cold. Scraping against the back door. Slow, deliberate, like someone trying to remove the snow just enough to get a grip. My first instinct was to hide, to pretend I wasn't there. I grabbed the baseball bat from the closet, held it tight, and crept toward the door. The flashlight I had left on the counter flickered, and when I switched it on, it illuminated nothing beyond the snow and darkness. No footprints, no figure, just the smudged mark I had seen earlier. The scraping stopped. I waited, holding my breath, and then it started again, but this time on the front door. Whoever or whatever was out there seemed to be moving carefully, deliberately. My heart pounded in my ears. I considered screaming, but there was no one to hear me except the wind. I realized then that I had to act, that sitting frozen in this house was only making me more vulnerable. I went to the bedroom, grabbed my coat, shoes, and a backpack, and filled it with a few essentials. I took my phone, fully charged it as much as I could, and left the back door unlocked intentionally. I had a plan. Get to the car, start it, and drive to the nearest 24-hour gas station. My hands were numb from fear and cold as I pulled open the door, expecting to see someone standing there. But the snow was undisturbed again, except for those first footprints leading up the driveway. They ended at my porch. Nothing more. I ran to the car, heart in my throat, and noticed something I hadn't seen before. The snow on the roof of the car had been wiped clean, like someone had brushed it off deliberately. I didn't pause to think. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The heater roared to life, fogging up the windows, but it was warmth I hadn't felt all night. I grabbed the shovel from the trunk to clear the snow piled against the driveway, cursing under my breath, and finally managed to get the car out onto the road. The drive through the storm was tense. I kept the headlights low to avoid glare from the snow, every crunch under the tires making me jump. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the highway and saw the dim lights of a gas station. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. I pulled in, parked, and locked the car. I finally called the police, explaining the situation as best I could. They told me an officer would come out as soon as the roads were passable. I stayed in the car for hours, huddled under blankets, watching the snow fall in blinding sheets. Slowly, I felt the panic drain from me, replaced by exhaustion. When the officer finally arrived, they walked the area with me. They found the tracks leading to my house, but nothing beyond. No one had been there, at least not recently. It was impossible to say if someone had been watching me or if the storm had somehow erased all evidence. The officer didn't have an explanation, but they reassured me that I had done the right thing by leaving and waiting for help. By morning, the snow had stopped, the storm retreating as quickly as it had arrived. I returned to my house with the officer and found it exactly as I had left it, nothing broken. No signs of forced entry. The only thing out of place was the faint smear of snow near the back porch, like a handprint pressed into the surface, slowly melting. I cleaned it up, shook my head, and let the sunlight pour into the living room, feeling the weight of the night finally lift. That Christmas morning, I didn't decorate any further, didn't bother with the turkey or the gifts. I sat in the living room, sipping coffee, listening to the quiet hum of the heater, feeling safe for the first time in hours. The wind had stopped, the forest was calm, and the world outside was bright and white. I realized something important that night. Fear can make the familiar feel like a trap, but careful, deliberate action, keeping calm and thinking ahead, can bring you back to safety. It was the scariest Christmas I've ever lived through, but by the end, it was clear I had survived not by luck, but by paying attention, staying calm, and trusting my own instincts. And even now, every year, when the snow falls thick and heavy, I check the driveway before going to bed, but I also remember that I made it through, and that knowledge, more than any decoration or gift, has become my true comfort. I had always thought of Christmas as quiet and safe, a time for small comforts and predictable routines. That year, however, everything felt different. I lived on the edge of town in a small, aging house, the kind that creaked and groaned even when the wind was still. Snow had started falling heavily on Christmas Eve, blanketing everything in thick silence, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than it should. I had finished my last-minute shopping earlier in the day and returned home carrying a few bags of groceries, the handles cutting into my fingers. I thought about turning on the heater, but when I did, I noticed it was sputtering, giving only brief bursts of warm air before going cold again. By nightfall, the snow had piled so high that the road outside was nearly invisible. I lit candles in every room I could find and set the little tree in the corner by the window. The lights flickered in the reflection of the glass, dancing shadows across the walls. The isolation felt different this year, heavier. Usually, I would have had family over, but a series of unfortunate events had left me alone. My phone had no signal, the kind that vanished in this part of town when snowstorms came, and the battery on my laptop was barely alive. I went to the kitchen to make a simple dinner. As I opened the cupboard, I noticed the latch on the door had loosened. The sound it made as it swung open echoed through the house. I paused, listening. The only sound was the snow falling, thick and muffling, but then I thought I heard something else, a faint scraping, like someone walking along the porch outside. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or the snow shifting on the roof. But the noise came again, deliberate this time, slow and measured, and I could swear it was accompanied by the faint sound of metal against wood, a scraping that didn't belong. I walked to the window and looked out. The street was empty, the falling snow thick, the kind that makes everything look uniform and strange. The porch steps were covered, but I thought I saw a shadow move near the front gate. My heart started to race, and I stepped back from the window. I told myself I was imagining things, that the house settling in the cold wind was enough to make my mind play tricks. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone or something was watching. I moved to the door, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. I checked the locks. They were all fine, nothing disturbed. But as I turned back, I noticed that one of the bags of groceries I had set down earlier had shifted slightly. Not enough to suggest anyone had touched it, but enough to make my stomach twist. I went back to the living room and tried to focus on the tree, the only source of warmth in the room now. The candlelight threw shadows that seemed to move on their own. I sat on the couch and wrapped myself in a blanket, trying to slow my breathing, when I heard it again, scraping, slow and deliberate, coming from the back door this time. My stomach sank. I hadn't gone out back at all, and the snow had completely covered the yard, leaving no footprints. Whoever or whatever it was hadn't walked on the snow. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but the phone line was dead, and my cell signal was gone. I felt trapped, the walls of the house closing in as the storm outside intensified. The snowstorm had created a kind of vacuum, a silence that made every little sound feel like a threat. The scraping grew louder, then stopped. I held my breath, listening to my own pulse in my ears. I thought I heard a faint cough, low and wet, coming from the corner of the house. My mind raced. Was it someone who had been trapped in the snow outside? Or someone who had followed me here? The rational part of my brain screamed at me to wait, to assess, but fear had a weight of its own. I slowly crept to the back door, knife in hand, my bare feet muffled against the rug. I peeked through the frosted glass. The backyard was empty. The snow swirled in the air, thick and blinding. Then I saw it. A figure hunched, moving slowly along the side of the house. I couldn't see a face, couldn't make out any details beyond the dark outline. My heart slammed against my ribs. I backed away and moved toward the front door, thinking I might escape if I had to. That's when the lights went out. The entire house went black, save for the faint glow of the tree through the living room window. I felt the darkness pressing in, heavier than the snow outside. Every creak of the house sounded amplified, every small noise suddenly a threat. I fumbled with the matches I had, striking one. The candle flared to life, and I could see the walls again. And then I saw the footprints, faint but there, leading from the back of the house around the side and stopping at the front porch. Not just one set, but two. Small, deliberate prints that hadn't been there before. I realized with a sickening certainty that someone had been inside while I was in the kitchen, while I was moving between rooms. I couldn't leave the house safely. The snowstorm had made the roads impassable. My mind raced for options. I remembered the old generator in the shed, the one my neighbor had told me about. I had never used it, but it was my only chance for light and warmth. I grabbed my coat, my boots, and slipped outside, the cold immediately biting at my skin. My breath came in white clouds, and the snow was already up to my knees. I fought through it, heart hammering, until I reached the shed. Inside, the generator was covered in a thin layer of frost. I struggled to start it, hands numb, until finally it roared to life. The shed lit up, the engine loud in the stillness. I could see the backyard in stark light. There was no one there. I checked the perimeter, the snow covering every inch of the yard, but there were no footprints leading away, no signs that anyone had fled. I went back inside, keeping the generator running near the back door. The house felt less like a trap with the hum of electricity. I checked every lock, every window. I stacked chairs against the doors, barricaded as best I could, and finally, I sat back down with the tree behind me. The snowstorm continued outside, relentless, but I felt a small, cautious sense of safety. Morning came slowly. The storm had passed, leaving the world white and quiet again. I opened the door carefully, checking the yard. The snow was pristine, as if nothing had happened. No footprints, no tracks. I walked to the street, and for the first time, I saw my neighbors' houses, all buried under the snow, quiet and still. I realized that whatever had happened the night before had left no trace, no explanation, just a memory that would linger in my mind forever. I spent the day cleaning up the house, checking the locks, and making sure every entry point was secure. I cooked a proper Christmas meal for myself and sat down by the tree, the lights now steady and bright. I allowed myself a small smile, the kind that comes from surviving something that shakes you to your core. I had been scared, yes, but I had endured, and in that endurance, I found a strange kind of peace. The storm had passed, the danger had left, and I had made it through the night. That Christmas, I learned something simple but profound. Sometimes the scariest moments aren't about monsters or ghosts, but about isolation, vulnerability, and the small choices that keep us safe. I had faced the unknown, and I had survived it with nothing more than caution, persistence, and a steady hand. I would always remember that night, the darkness, the scraping, the fear, but I would also remember the quiet victory of making it through, and the calm light of a small tree in the corner of my little house. And for the first time in years, I slept that night without fear, letting the snow fall quietly outside, letting Christmas be a small, quiet miracle of survival. I had always loved Christmas when I was a kid. The way the lights glowed on the street, the smell of pine from the tree, and the quiet that settled in the late evenings after the last carol had faded. But that year, Christmas felt different. It was the first winter after I had moved into the small town of Harrow's Mill, a place that seemed frozen in time. The roads were narrow, winding, and often iced over, and most of the houses were old, built decades ago, with paint peeling and wooden steps creaking under the weight of snow. I thought living here would be peaceful, maybe even cozy. I didn't expect it to be terrifying. I lived alone in a small two-story house on the edge of town, just past the old mill that no one had used in years. The house had been empty for a while before I moved in, so the first winter was mostly about getting it warm and livable. I was working night shifts at the local diner, so I often came home when it was dark, the wind slicing through the trees, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the neighbors' chimneys. That December, a heavy snowstorm had been forecasted. The weather report warned that it might last through Christmas, and the town braced itself for it. I didn't mind. I liked the snow even when it made driving difficult. It was Christmas Eve, and I had just finished decorating my tree. The living room was warm from the small space heater I had placed in the corner. The lights on the tree reflected off the walls, making the room glow with a soft, golden hue. Outside, the snow was falling thick and fast, coating the world in white silence. I had baked a few cookies earlier, the smell still lingering in the kitchen, and I poured myself a cup of cocoa, the steam rising in lazy curls. It was quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt since moving here. I should have known something was off when I looked out the window toward the road. At first, it was just the snow, thick and blinding, but then I noticed something moving, a dark shape against the whiteness. I thought it was a deer at first. We had a lot of wildlife around the house, and it wasn't unusual for them to wander close. But it moved differently, too deliberate, too steady. I squinted, trying to make it out, but the snow made it impossible. I shrugged it off and returned to my cocoa, telling myself I was imagining things. Hours passed. The storm worsened, snow piling against the front door, making it hard to open. I turned on the old radio, static at first, then a soft crackle before a Christmas station finally came through. I listened, trying to calm myself, but a strange feeling settled in my chest. A sense of being watched, of something pressing against the edges of the house. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the wind, the storm, the isolation getting to me. Later, I went to bed, leaving the heater on low. I fell asleep, but the storm didn't let me rest. I woke to the sound of scraping against the windows, a soft, grating noise like something heavy being dragged across the glass. My heart pounded. I told myself it was probably a branch, blown by the wind, but then I realized it was coming from the front door. I froze, listening. The sound stopped, then started again, slower this time. I got out of bed, careful not to make a sound. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door and crept to the living room. The snow had stopped falling, but the world outside was nothing but white, the streetlights casting weak circles of light through the drifting flakes that still clung to the air. My front door was intact, no signs of forced entry, but the doormat had been moved slightly, as if someone had stepped on it. Panic set in, a cold, sinking dread. I considered calling the police, but the storm had knocked out the cell towers. Even if I called, I wasn't sure anyone could reach me in time. The nearest neighbor lived half a mile away, and in this weather, it was impossible to get there without risking serious injury. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening. Every creak of the house, every groan of the wood settling, made me jump. I could hear footsteps outside, faint, careful, circling the house. I checked the windows locked, covered in frost. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I realized with growing horror that whoever or whatever was outside had been there for hours, waiting. Morning came, or at least the gray light of dawn filtered through the clouds. I was exhausted but determined to see what had happened overnight. I opened the front door slowly, careful to avoid the snow drifts that blocked the threshold. The yard was empty. The snow was untouched, except for a set of footprints leading from the edge of the woods to my front door. They stopped abruptly at the steps, no marks leading away. I followed them into the yard, crunching in the snow, my heart racing. The footprints were human, adult-sized, and deep, indicating someone heavy. Whoever had been there had stood at my door, maybe even tried it, but had vanished without a trace. I searched the surrounding area for hours, the storm clearing to reveal a frozen, silent town. There was no one, nothing. Days passed. I called the police once the cell towers came back online, explained the footprints, the sounds, the feeling of being watched. They came, checked the area, made notes, but there was no evidence of a break-in, no signs that anyone had been inside. They suggested it might have been a prank, someone wandering drunk in the storm, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. Someone had been there, right outside my door, and they had left when they saw I was awake. Christmas morning came, and I felt the strangest mix of relief and lingering fear. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and looked at the yard. The snow had been shoveled by a neighbor, and the footprints were gone. I stepped outside cautiously, checking every corner. Nothing. The world was peaceful again, almost normal. I spent the day decorating the outside of the house, putting up lights, making sure the doors and windows were secure. I realized that the only way to feel safe was to reclaim the space, to take back control. By evening, the house glowed with light, the warmth of the heater pushing back the cold. I sat by the tree, sipping cocoa, letting myself relax. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. When I woke on December 26th, everything seemed normal. The storm had passed, the streets were clear, and the town had returned to its usual quiet rhythm. I never saw anyone near my house again. No footprints, no movement in the trees. I never found out who had been there, and I never stopped feeling a little wary when I looked out at the woods. But I survived, and that Christmas, I learned something important. Fear is powerful, but it doesn't control you unless you let it. I still celebrate Christmas in Harrow's Mill, but now I do it with extra care, double-locked doors, and a careful eye on the darkened woods outside. That year taught me that danger doesn't always come with warnings, and it doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it's quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment. But the most important part of that Christmas was knowing that even when fear surrounds you, you can still find warmth, safety, and a sense of normalcy, even in the middle of the storm.